I'm going back to my parents' house for just 1 week. Seeing me say this in a firm attitude that was different from usual, my husband laughed in disbelief as if he was making fun of me. "Oh, is that so? Write your divorce papers too before you leave. Don't come back." As always, my husband spoke roughly. He must believe that I would never leave him on my own, that I wouldn't write the divorce papers, and that I would return soon. I was getting sick of my husband who kept looking down on me. "Understood. I'll write them." I quietly nodded and responded. When I started to pack my belongings into the suitcase I took out of the closet, my husband clicked his tongue in irritation. "What are you going to do without any money, stupid?" he said so loud enough for me to hear. I ignored my husband like that and tightly grasped the envelope I had in my pocket. "I'm currently 55 years old and my name is Amy. My husband, John, is 4 years older than me. We live together as a couple. Since I was raised in an orphanage, I had no relatives to rely on. Therefore, there were times when I felt very envious of my friends who had parents when I was a child. However, the life in the orphanage, spending fun times with the staff and my friends, naturally became an irreplaceable time for me. The cause of missing such orphanage life was all because of this marriage. Since we don't have children, people in the neighborhood sometimes tell us, "It must be nice to be able to spend time leisurely as a couple." Each time, I had mixed feelings because we, as a couple, are not leading a married life that would be envied by others. Most people would probably never notice that I was being treated terribly by my husband. Because we, as a couple, were acting as ordinary, sensible people outside of our house. My husband and I met at an equipment manufacturer where we worked after graduating from high school. I was a high school graduate and my husband was a university graduate, but we joined the company at the same time. I was assigned to a factory to manufacture parts as a high school graduate, and my husband worked at the head office as a salesman as a university graduate. When I joined the company, I had met him once during the new employee training, but we were not close enough to talk to each other because he was 4 years older than me. His sharp eyes and neat nose line were exactly my type in men. However, due to my gloomy personality, I was too busy adjusting to the new environment. In such a state, there was no way I could initiate a conversation with an older man. As I indulged in the fantasy of, "It would be nice if we could talk someday," my husband, who had been assigned to the sales department, came to visit the factory. Salespeople need to know the manufacturing process at the factory in order to have a thorough understanding of our company's products. Probably, my husband visited the factory for the sake of learning as well. Donned in work clothes and dealing with the task mechanically, I was surprised when my husband approached me and asked, "Aren't you Amy?" Although we hadn't met or talked since the new employee training, he recognized me even though my hairstyle was hidden by my work clothes. I couldn't believe it. "Yes, you're John, right?" "Exactly. We're the same batch. We couldn't talk much during the training. Nice to meet you again." John, being older, spoke to me in a friendly manner. I was so happy that I felt like jumping up, and it was all I could do to keep my composure. Although he wasn't someone I admired, it felt like a dream to be spoken to by a man I liked. After that, whenever John visited the factory, he would come to me and start a conversation. Although there were questions about the product, there were also times when we had a private conversation in a low voice so that others couldn't hear. Since we couldn't talk freely during work, John invited me to dinner. I felt a joy that seemed to overflow from my entire body. After having a meal with John, we naturally developed a relationship as we met and dated several times. and in our 5th year since joining the company, we decided to register our marriage. Now that we're married, why don't you quit your job and become a full-time housewife? I want you to support me by staying at home. If that's what you want, then I'll do it. Filled with happiness and joy of being with the person I loved, I agreed to my husband's, "I want you to quit your job." At the young age of 23, many people in the workplace were retiring due to marriage, and I myself didn't have much attachment to my job. That's why I easily replied to my husband's request without much consideration, not knowing that this choice would derail my future life. After getting married, my life revolved around housework. For about the first year, I was able to live a trouble-free newlywed life. I served dinner to my husband when he came home tired and had him take a bath. I prepared drinks when he said, "I want alcohol," and even massaged him when he said, "Rub my feet." One thing I found out after getting married was that my husband was extremely obsessed with cleanliness. The house had to be kept very clean. Even such cleaning didn't bother me at all, thinking, if it's for the person I love. In the early days of our marriage, a friend from my orphanage days came to visit me once. Since she worked shift hours at a call center, we decided to meet during the daytime on a weekday. When she asked, "How's married life?" I told her, "I'm managing well as a full-time housewife." After hearing my life with my husband, my friend said with a serious expression, "Listening to you, it seems like your husband is very domineering. Amy, it feels like you're just a housekeeper." I was shocked by my friend's words. Being a housewife all the time, I didn't even think that my house was strange. "Huh? Isn't that normal?" Although I replied as if I wasn't bothered, I was quite shaken. Even after my friend left, my mind was clouded for the rest of the day, and I was unable to concentrate on my chores when my husband came home before I had finished cleaning. "Hey, are you here? Amy!" My husband stomped into the living room with a scary look on his face, making a tremendous noise. Surprised, I gave a jolt. "Despite telling you to wash it, the entrance mat was dirty. You're slacking off." I'm sorry." My husband scolded me fiercely for this one mistake. I was very confused as I had never seen him yell so much. The husband standing before me was the exact opposite of the gentle husband I knew, and "Next time, be careful. You're just a housewife with only a high school diploma who can't do anything." "Yes." Those were the words my husband spat out as he walked to the room. I couldn't get the phrase, "a high school graduate housewife who can't do anything," out of my head from the first time I was scolded. My husband, a university graduate, looked down on me, a high school graduate. Perhaps he approached me and married me to satisfy his self-esteem. Being with me, an orphanage-raised high school graduate, his competence could stand out, and he could feel superior. After being berated, I couldn't think otherwise, and my prediction came true. Since that day, my husband's attitude towards me changed drastically. "Here's your allowance for this month." Thank you." In our household, which used an allowance system, my husband was supposed to give me money on payday every month. Being a full-time housewife, I humbly accepted the money in the envelope from him. When I opened it, there was only $10 inside. Until last month, he used to give me $200, so when it suddenly decreased, I thought it might have been a mistake. About the amount, isn't there a mistake?" Since I was in the position of receiving an allowance, I felt hesitant to say, "It's too little," so I asked timidly, "Huh? There's no mistake. Why should I give a lot of money to someone who can't even do housework properly?" There was my husband, laughing snidely. I was lost for words and couldn't respond. Do I have to survive on just $10 for a month? Of course, I haven't been living extravagantly so far, but now I can't even afford to go to the hair salon. But I know that voicing such concerns would be pointless. I grit my teeth and held back. From then on, my allowance was just $10 each month. There were even times when it was as little as $5. The amount fluctuated depending on my work performance as a housewife in the previous month, but it never exceeded $10. Knowing I have no way to earn money, he intentionally doesn't give me a satisfactory allowance. By doing so, not only can I not escape, but he can also satisfy his own pride by supporting a wife who can't earn money. From the beginning, he married me to maintain his dignity. There was no love between us at all. When I realized that, I was so frustrated that tears welled up. He said, "I love you" many times, but was it a lie? When I thought that I had been deceived by my husband, I felt pathetic and wished I could go back to before we got married. However, such a wish is impossible to fulfill. I have to endure financial control from my husband for the decades of life ahead. I tried looking for a way to earn my own money, but if I worked part-time, my husband would find out. He strongly refused to let me work. If he found out I was working, in addition to financial control, I would end up getting hit and getting bruises on my body. I was scared and couldn't take a single step forward. Several decades have passed since I started suffering from my husband. I have managed to live while enduring the abuse and violence from him. It felt like I was living someone else's life, even though it was my own. The morning came, and I waited for night to come. It felt like I was in prison every day. At 55, I was fed up with my daily life of just doing housework and turned on the vacuum cleaner with a sigh. At that moment, a call from an unknown number was displayed on my cell phone. Who could it be? In the early days of my marriage, I used to receive calls from former colleagues and friends from the orphanage, but in recent years, there have been none at all. The occasional calls I do get are basically only from telemarketers. Hello? I answered the phone thinking it was probably another sales call, but it was a call from an unexpected person. Hello, is this Amy? It's me. The voice calling my name with a raspy voice was surprisingly my father-in-law. Father-in-law? It's been a long time. What brings you to call all of a sudden? Actually, I've been thinking about returning to Japan. My in-laws have been living in America for a long time. They worked there from the time they were salaried workers, and after retirement, they decided to live there permanently because they liked the lifestyle. However, due to the impact of a pandemic, we had been unable to meet at all recently. But it seems that things have calmed down recently, and they are thinking of returning to Japan. Wow, really? Of course, I would love to see you! Actually, I had a good relationship with my in-laws. If you need anything, feel free to ask. They reached out to me like that. They probably think of me as their own child. Having no family of my own, I was so happy about the warm call from my father-in-law that I almost cried. From my situation, father-in-law, who has good intuition, asked, "Are you having trouble with something? You should talk about it." I was a little hesitant, but I told father-in-law everything about the constraints and verbal abuse my husband had put on me up to now. What? That idiot son of mine! My father-in-law, who had been listening to my story, was so angry that he seemed about to explode. I felt relieved that I was finally able to confess my feelings and reality to someone. I'm sorry that I couldn't be of any help to you, Amy. From now on, I want you to rely on me. I've been thinking that I've had enough of living in America. My wife and I are going to return to Japan, so you can rely on us any time. Thank you so much! When I think about my in-laws coming back to Japan, I strangely feel encouraged. I might be able to live without obeying my husband. Suddenly, such hope descended upon me, and my heart was pounding. That day, after hearing that my in-laws would return to Japan, I was so distracted that dinner was delayed. As it happens, my husband came home earlier than usual. It seems that he didn't have much to do at work. Thinking that it was bad, I braced myself with one eye closed. What are you doing? Dinner isn't ready yet. As expected, my husband got angry right away and glared at me with a demonic expression. He looked like he would swing his hand at any moment. Reflexively, I took a step back. However, the words father-in-law told me on the phone earlier are echoing in my head. You can rely on me anytime. Father-in-law's words pushed me back and became my strength. I can't bear this life anymore. I'm going home for just a week. My husband laughed dismissively at my uncharacteristically resolute demeanor. Huh? Where is your home? An orphanage? Write your divorce papers before you leave then. Don't come back ever again. His words were as rough as always. He probably thought, she won't write the divorce papers that easily. She'll give up and come back soon. I was fed up with his condescending attitude. I understand. I quietly nodded. I picked up the pen and started to write on the divorce papers that were thrust in front of me. My husband, seeing this, asked, Are you serious? He looked at me, trembling. He had threatened me with divorce papers several times before. Each time, he expected me, who had no way to make money, to beg him, Please, no divorce, I'm sorry. But this time was different. He was dumbfounded as I signed the divorce papers. I started packing my things and took out a suitcase from the closet. During that time, my husband clicked his tongue in irritation and said, What are you going to do without money? You're an idiot. He made sure I could hear him. I ignored him, tightly clutching an envelope in my pocket. I left the house with my luggage and headed straight for a hotel near the airport. My in-laws were returning to Japan the next day, so I decided to meet them at the airport. I arrived at the hotel, took out money from the envelope I had been clenching in my pocket, and paid for the accommodation. I had recently been able to make money from my hobby of sewing. The orphanage that took care of me when I was a child was happy to buy things like pillow covers and bedspreads that I made. They also paid me in cash so my husband wouldn't find out. Although there was no one I knew from the time when I was taken care of at the orphanage, they were sympathetic when I told them about my situation and offered to help. From the current staff, I received really encouraging words. You can always rely on us. I was really happy that I could use the precious money when I really needed it. Once I got to the hotel room, I fell asleep feeling relieved. I felt that I could greet my in-laws with a smile the next day. My in-laws returned to Japan the following afternoon. When I met them at the airport, they squinted their eyes and said, You've truly had it tough, haven't you? She emphasized with the hardships I had gone through. It must have been really tough. I'm really sorry that I couldn't help you. We need to teach that stupid son a lesson. Father-in-law seemed to be thinking about what should be done regarding his unfaithful son. After putting my luggage in my in-law's house, I immediately headed to the city office. When I submitted the divorce papers I filled out yesterday, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Now I am a stranger to my husband. I savored the joy and happiness of being free. I will be staying at my in-laws' house for a while. As expected, There were a tremendous number of calls from my ex-husband on my cell phone. At first, it was a few times a day, but the next day it was 20 times, and eventually it became 100 times. My ex-husband called me regardless of my working hours. I was really amazed that he was the one who threw the divorce papers at me. I could ignore or block calls from my ex-husband, but I couldn't stand the many calls, so I canceled my cell phone. I reported to my in-laws that I could finally have a peaceful daily life.
That's not enough to calm us down. We need to figure out what to do.
That's right. We need to make sure he reflects on his actions. My in-laws seemed to have come up with a punishment for their son. On Sunday afternoon, they said, "Come with us." Being told that, I got in the car driven by my father-in-law. I wonder where we're going, I thought, but the car drove along a familiar road and arrived at the condominium where my ex-husband lived. It was the condominium where I had been living until a few days ago.
"Amy, do you have the key?"
He asked me without any hesitation. "Yes, I do," I said, and handed over the house key I still had to my father-in-law.
"John, are you there? John!"
He stomped around, entering the house like a debt collector in a gangster movie, and the husky, raspy voice of my father-in-law was so powerful it made me tremble. "Huh? Who's there?" Fresh out of the bath, with his wet hair all messed up, he squinted at us. "Dad? Why?" He widened his eyes in surprise. No doubt he was shocked. His parents had appeared out of nowhere. From his perspective, his parents, who were supposed to still be overseas, suddenly appeared in front of him.
"Long time no see, John."
"Huh? What are you doing here? Why are you in Japan?"
"We came back because the pandemic in the US has settled down. More importantly, John, we have something to talk about."
Looking at me shrinking behind his father, my ex-husband seemed to sense what was coming, and he took a step back. Then he glared at me as if to say, "Why are you here?" "Why don't you answer when I call you so many times, Amy? Do you have such a right? Don't mess with me." I shrunk in fear at my ex-husband's fierce yelling and verbal abuse. My father-in-law stood in front of me to shield me.
"John, do you understand what you've been doing to Amy all this time? You took advantage of the fact that we were overseas and Amy had no one to rely on. Controlling her, using violence. Don't you feel ashamed as a person, as a man?"
Watching my father-in-law scold my ex-husband, I was stunned. You know, he used to be quite a famous tough guy in his younger days. My mother-in-law secretly told me this in my ear, and it made sense. "That has nothing to do with you, Dad. Just because you're my father, it doesn't mean you can show up now and start lecturing me." Unable to back down, my ex-husband took a confrontational stance and retaliated against my father-in-law's words. However, my father-in-law, who was not perturbed in the slightest by his son's bluster, pressed further.
"Nothing to do with me? No way. Amy is our daughter, and your mother feels the same. What are you? Do you find it enjoyable to torment and verbally abuse your precious wife? You're not our child, nor anything else to us. We're cutting ties with you. This is a disownment."
Huh? Even I was surprised and looked at my father-in-law. My father-in-law was standing firm, staring at my ex-husband with a serious look in his eyes. It was clear at a glance that this wasn't something he said out of emotion. My mother-in-law, too, was silently closing her eyes and nodding deeply. It seems they had decided to disown their son even before visiting here. "Disownment? Cutting ties? You can't do that! And Amy, why aren't you saying anything while your husband is being accused like this?" "Husband? We're already divorced, you know." "Huh? That can't be true." "The divorce papers you handed to me have already been submitted." What? My ex-husband turned pale, not having expected that the divorce papers had truly been submitted.
You don't ever need to show your face around here again. Get out of here right now!
Seeing my ex-husband's arrogant and negligent attitude towards me, my father-in-law, who seemed even scarier than when I was yelled at my ex-husband before, shouted in anger. Ah! My ex-husband, his wet hair flying wildly, disappeared from our home. This house was actually owned by my father-in-law. At the beginning of our marriage, we didn't have much money, so we were taken care of in a property owned by my father-in-law. And for the past 20-some years, we continued to live in the same house under their care. Thus, my ex-husband was literally kicked out of the house. You're an incredible person, father-in-law!
It's been a while since I let my true nature out. In the past, doing things like this was an everyday occurrence.
My father-in-law's hearty laughter made me and my mother-in-law laugh together. It felt like the first time I had genuinely laughed since separating from my ex-husband. Afterwards, my ex-husband, who lost his home, started living in a run-down old apartment. Unbeknownst to me, my ex-husband was on the verge of being fired from his company due to misconduct. He managed to convince his boss to keep him as a full-time employee, but his position was stripped and he was demoted back to a regular worker. Furthermore, he was transferred from the sales department to factory work. With his salary cut, he could only afford a cheap apartment with no bath or balcony. I felt relieved that I had gotten divorced before this happened. As for me, I am in the process of being adopted thanks to the suggestion of my in-laws. I was surprised at first, but since I don't have any parents, I was very happy about this proposal and accepted immediately without hesitation. My father-in-law and ex-husband ended up severing their parent-child relationship after all. My in-laws, who were actually quite wealthy, could foresee my ex-husband relying on them if they didn't cut ties, so they did it to avoid that. Under my in-laws, my parents, I am living a life of ease and happiness. Furthermore, I continue to pursue my hobby of sewing, creating items needed at orphanages. The staff still purchase the items I make. Lately, not only for orphanages, I've started creating bags and clothing to sell online. There are still few customers, but thankfully there are many good reviews, and I expect the number of sales to increase in the future. Being able to be with my kind parents and enjoy my freedom to work, I am truly happy now.